Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. Back today to discover a fresh perspective. I'm here with Carol Cambridge. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks so much for having me. I so appreciate you.
Well, and I love to be appreciated. And now, Carol, you're not in Canada. Whereabouts are you located right now?
Well, right now I am in Glendale, Arizona, but I'm born and raised and spent my early career in emergency services in London, Ontario, Canada. So I am still a Canadian, even though I reside here in Arizona.
Great. So then we can still be friends. Good to know. So, Carol, I noticed you talk about I see Carol Cambridge and the Stay Safe project, and today we just talk about something that someone is passionate about. So I'm imagining that some of that is about staying safe. Can you say a little bit more about what you're passionate about and actually why you're passionate?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it probably stems back to my years in London, Ontario on the police department. And I was in emergency services. So I answered 911 calls, I dispatched police officers, I trained the new dispatchers, call takers coming in, and basically talked to people at their worst moments in life. Their worst disasters, things that they never dreamt would ever happen, but at their worst moments. And I really saw how people were really not prepared, uh, just not understanding and not acting reasonable or responsible or anything else in a crisis. And it really got me thinking. And when I moved to the States, I wanted to start. Using the skills that I had learned and sort of transfer those skills into the community, into companies, and teach people how to use critical thinking skills. I think in the old days, my dad used to call it common sense. And I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think we seem to have less common sense these days than we used to. Um, but it really started from there, and I notice even today working in companies all across Canada and the US that there seems to be less ability, to use critical thinking, and it's not an inbred we're not born with it, it's something that we learn, and I don't think it's taught too much in schools anymore, uh, and yet it's something that can save our life and save somebody else's life.
So how do you get someone to start to thinking, just I mean, for any kind of skill, if it's something that you don't have immediate use for, sometimes it goes away, the awareness isn't sufficient. So how do you go about building people's common sense or critical thinking skills so that they don't get in trouble as often?
Well, sometimes it feels like it's impossible, uh, but, I would say, usually in the training that I do and the speaking and, even in some of the consulting, and I don't do very much consulting anymore, but, um, it's usually a result of a problem that a client has or that a person has. So they have a situation and they don't know how to deal with it, and so I'm able then to teach them how to think through it. I First of all, I don't think most people really understand what critical thinking is, and eh, it's really about, questioning. It's about analyzing, interpreting, evaluating. It's all of those things put together. And part of that is identifying our biases, identifying our assumptions, and being able to clarify and being open minded enough to consider different perspectives. And so when I get called in to do training, it's usually on a serious subject. It's usually on workplace violence or on how to survive an active shooter. It could even be in a high risk termination. So people are really emotionally involved, um, and they let their emotions cloud them. And you can't have emotions playing in critical thinking. So I will guide them, ask them the right questions, get them to think past, deeper, and beyond. It requires some self-discipline, and so that can be tricky when we're teaching people. But when I teach people to look for, say, a profile of somebody who might become violent, uh, I'll share some information. I'll share some suggestions as to what they can look for. But there's no rhyme or reason. It isn't just one or two of those. You or I could have a bad day and we could blow up and say something that's inappropriate or even do something that might be considered appropriate in the workplace. I'm not talking about that. I'm getting them to look at what's the bigger picture? What's the longevity? Has this been going on for a long time? Is this kind of behavior increasing all the time? Because those are the clues I'm looking for. Is this person very worrisome? And in the work that I do, it could be that that person is having a breakdown. It could be a mental illness,
Mhm.
not a violent response whatsoever, because they're very closely knit. They're very similar. And if I really knew how to make the distinction between those two with no problem, I'd be a multimillionaire sitting having this conversation somewhere in the Caribbean, I think. But you have to have people open to really thinking about critical thinking and clarifying and getting them to ask the right questions, and then being able to analyze the answers that they get.
So it seems to me that you can train someone to anticipate as though we say anticipate here in BC, but um, to to anticipate so you can avoid or have some kind of a strategy, and that's great if you have time for that critical thinking. I guess what I wonder is how do you develop a different habit so in the moment when those emotions come up, you don't have that amygdala hijack that you have no control over. So how do you prepare people to be better able to, once they're in it, recognize what they're in and respond more appropriately? Or is that even possible?
It is possible. It takes a little bit of training. It takes a change of mindset. And I appreciate that you even know and understand what an amygdala hijacking is, because I teach that in the program that I do on managing the new angry,
Hmm.
with de-escalation skills. And I find once people understand what an amygdala hijacking is, they can start to understand why their brain is taking them to those emotional places. Um, so we start there, and we start in a simple way of getting that mind shift. It's almost, I guess I'd call it cognitive flexibility. How do you have that flexibility? Because those emotions are still gonna come up. They
Hmm.
just, recognize them and and then be able to think differently. One of the techniques I teach is Alt Control Delete, and that's it pops up. It's gonna come up. Is fear gonna enter your brain? Yeah, absolutely it is. Recognize it, acknowledge it, Control Alt Delete, shift my mindset. Shift it over here. And a couple of quick well, let me give you a quick example. And I see this kind of in every day. Uh, I think I was in Pennsylvania, and I had finished no, I was headed to the program. That's it. I was headed to the program. It was in the morning, so it was rush hour, really busy, and we're stopped at train tracks. Train goes through, there's quite a pile of us waiting. I wanna say we're back probably a half a mile maybe, or 3/4 of a kilometer, something like that. Anyway, um, we're there, and all of a sudden I hear the sirens, and I start looking around. I look in my rearview mirror, I'm looking around, my head's on a swivel. It's fine. People are hearing it. They stay still. Ambulance comes up in the opposing lane of traffic and gets through the intersection just fine. And then everybody starts moving, and I'm yelling, "Stop! Like, don't move." When you see an ambulance or when you see a fire truck, you're probably going to see another emergency vehicle. You're gonna see If it was an ambulance, you're gonna see the paramedics, or you're gonna see, police. You're going to see a second emergency vehicle in most cases. Not always, but there's a very good chance. That's critical thinking. And that's just a minor example that we get to train ourselves to look at things differently. And we kinda live in a society, I think, that teaches us opposite, especially with social media. We believe everything we see. Um Not so when people don't question it. Another great example would be I've seen this several times on Facebook, and I try not to make people wrong on Facebook. uh,
Kinda hard to make them right most times, but anyhow.
it is, it is. But I do my best. But this one, I've just had to speak up and say something. So you might have seen it. It's well intended. It shows a picture of a person's window, and there's a piece of green construction paper in the window. And the story behind it is that an elderly person lives there alone. And the neighbor wants to keep informed that they're good and they're safe and that they're okay. And so if there is a green piece of paper there, everything is fine. Go about your day. They don't have any issues. They don't need anything, no problem. If there's a yellow piece of construction paper in the window, they could use some help. It's not urgent, but they could use some help. Maybe they need help getting some groceries or, whatever, need a prescription picked up at the pharmacy or something like that, where you could help them, but there's no real urgency. Red means they're in trouble. Come and help me. I think, okay, the intention is good. The problem is when we have someone who's elderly, two or three likely things are going to happen to them. They're going to fall and they can't get up. That green piece of paper can be in the window for days and we don't know that they've fallen. They could have had a heart attack and or a stroke. Nobody's going to know because the green sheet of paper is up in the window.
Right, right.
So it's very well intended, but let's think this through. Let's, like I say, evaluate it. Does this make sense? I know the intention's really good, but how do we shift this thinking? Might be better to do a text or a phone call or knock on their door.
Mhm.
Whatever the case might be. And so those are the things that I see people buying into. And then they start spreading this, and other people think, well, that's a great idea. So maybe we'll do that. I'll tell my neighbor about it, so on and so forth. And so we spread disinformation that in the end could be extremely harmful. So those are kind of a couple examples of just ways I see it playing out. And when we start somebody just seeing an example that could happen to their parents, let's say, all of a sudden they start thinking, oh, okay, I get it. Think I understand what she's talking about. So, first, it's really just about creating that awareness, right?
S
Wouldn't you
so
say that in your business? You see that? You've got to create the awareness first before there's going to be any change.
absolutely. You have to get people caring and paying attention. There's a couple of things running through my mind, Carol, and one of them is just a response that some people have to the word critical because it's seen as like a critique, and it's about putting someone down and things like that. And it's getting them to think that thinking critically as opposed to being a critic, because those words sound very similar, but I think that the behavior is quite different. And another thing that occurred to me, and I don't know how you do this, but I remember one time seeing an example of a person where they had to respond to something. There was a bit of they had to take some action, and it showed their brain a message going to two different rooms, and one was the panic center, and that's where there are these three people that were kind of sitting around. They've been at their desk, just kind of falling asleep. They run around trying to find the answer to this. They're opening filing cabinets and things like that, and then the scene flashes over to the connection center, and there's this person in a kind of a white suit, all kinds of computers, and he's got the answer, trying to dial through to the person, but the line is busy. Right? So, how do we, in the moment, not go to that panic center? Like, how long does it take for the awareness to go into having a sense of skill, but then actually being able to execute it? And have you seen any examples where people have said, Carol, I'm so glad I went through this. Here's the situation. Here's how I was able to handle it differently. Does anyone ever get back to you and say, thank you?
Uh,
Like me
yes.
saying thank you for being on this podcast. A little thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Um, Probably the one that sticks out the most. I was I did training, and offer an experiential training on active shooter, surviving an active shooter. Let me clarify that. And we actually do a couple of drills. And Following it, one of the gentlemen came to me and he said, Carol, I just want to say hello and shake your hand and say thank you. He said, I've been to several of your trainings before, and I take all your information home and I talk about it with my wife and my kids. And he said, I've been doing this for several years. He said, I think this is the third or the fourth time that I've seen you present. And he said, I want to tell you that my wife survived an active shooter, and in part because of what you taught me to do.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
said, really? And she was involved in the Las Vegas, if you remember the active shooter situation, was huge a few years ago, where the gentleman was at the Mandalay Bay and shot just indiscriminately at a concert, and people were running in all directions. And she did get shot. She was hospitalized. And he said, but I do believe she survived in part because of the information that you shared with us. So
Wow.
it is really life saving information to be able to use critical thinking. But to circle back to what you asked me about, how long does it take? Some people are better at it than others. Um, it's different for everybody. There are some people, you know, there's somebody in our lives, my husband and my lives, that loves our dogs, takes care of our dogs often when we travel, and she's has zero ability to do critical thinking.
Oh.
She means well, she tries hard no matter what we've taught, no matter what has been
Mm,
said. She
mm,
just does not seem to have that ability. Now, if you have somebody who has, the other thing that interrupts it or is a problem for learning it is trauma, past trauma.
mm, mm,
So if someone has been the victim of violence, whether that's been a rape, assault, a home invasion, any form, it could even be a car accident, a severe car accident. My best friend is in Ontario, and she won't drive on the highway anymore. And she was in a very bad rollover accident on the 401, and she never went back to driving on the 4. She'll drive in the city, but she will not drive on the highway. She's never really dealt with that trauma, doesn't think it affects her life, just
mm.
chooses not to, but it does. All of that trauma plays into it. So those are the things that stop the critical thinking. The other thing that can stop us from learning that, or it takes longer, is if we're stuck on being right. Do you know anybody like that?
I've met a couple like that. Yes, yeah, and occasionally have moments of that myself that I'm trying to reduce or eliminate.
Well, all of us, if we're honest, all of us have it to a certain extent. Hopefully we let it go for the most part. But we've all met that person who's really stuck on being right in all things. They think they know everything about everything, and they are just stuck on being right. Those kind of folks have a really tough time. They're just not open minded enough, and they just can't think through. Um, but other people who are open to it will see pretty quickly and they'll understand. So, I'll share another example with you. When I do this surviving an active shooter program, um, I plant people with disabilities in the audience. And so when we do the first drill, 90, probably 8% of the time, they all get left behind. Nobody stops and gets them or
Mm,
helps. They just get left behind. And so when we do the debrief with everybody, I ask, who are the people with disabilities, and they'll raise their hand, and we go over and chat with them and talk to them. And I said, how'd that make you feel? Well, awful. I can't believe even the people on either side of me, they just took off. Well, I set the drill up on purpose this way. We're
mm,
very single minded when it comes to an emergency, when it comes to a critical situation. And if it's trying to save our life, most of us are like, we're getting out of here. We're out the door. We're not thinking about anybody else. So this gentleman raised his hand and he said, Carol, he said, I hear what you're saying, but he said, I have to be perfectly honest with you. I don't like anybody that I work with well enough that I would stop and help them out in an act of
oh,
situation.
whoa! Oh my goodness!
I thanked him for his honesty. We got past the groans and the moans of the other people in the audience. And I said, I hope you don't have too many coworkers with you here at today's conference. But after the moans and groans and the laughter, I looked at him and I said, Sir, do you have children or grandchildren? And he looked up at me and he said, Oh my gosh, that didn't even occur to me. I said, if you're training yourself to just get up and go and forget everybody else, you might do that when it's your grandchild. Oh God, I'd never do that. I'd never do that in a million years. He said, but thank you for shifting my mindset. And so that's what I'm talking about. If we can catch people at an emotional level, how it affects them, then it's still going to pop up for them. Whatever that trauma was, whatever that emotional moment was, it's going to pop up and it's going to be there, but they're going to be able to choose critical thinking above and beyond.
And it seems to me that this does require practice and reinforcement. And I think of it may not be a good metaphor, but CPR. Like,
Oh,
you take CPR and yeah, I got it. You're pumping a chest of a dummy and things like that. And if you haven't taken it for 10 or 15 years and you're in that situation, you're not. There's nothing you can do. Like I remember, I think it was James Lovell, who's one of the Apollo astronauts when they managed to avert a disaster. And when he's being interviewed, he said, "Well, how were you able to remain so calm?" And he said, "Well, you know what? We had never been trained for that particular situation." But we were trained to know that there's going to be something that comes up, and it's not how to handle each specific situation, but how generically to handle a situation where you could go into panic but choose not to. And it seems like that would be an incredibly valuable mindset for anyone, whether it's an emergency situation or just something you haven't run into before.
you're 100% right on. 100%. My years in law enforcement, you would have people calling at their worst moments and they would just scream, just literally scream. They couldn't even, give an address. And this is back in the age. I'm kind of ancient. So this is back in the age, prior to computers, we didn't have, a 911 system that showed the address when the call came up. We didn't have cell phones back then. So if you couldn't tell us where you were, we had no idea. We could trace the line, but it could take a couple hours, you know. Um, and so I think it's a really valid point. How do we teach people to choose not to go into the panic? Because the panic is going to happen. Um, you know, when I worked for London Police Services, we had a police officer shot, and it was my shift. I was the one in charge. He did several things wrong, um, but I'll call it a God moment, if you will. Uh, he didn't answer me when I was calling him. He had just cleared another call, maybe, I don't know, 8, 10 minutes earlier. And it was the middle of the night. I gave him another chance. And then I called him again on the radio. He didn't respond. And then another person in the radio room had taken a call about potential shots fired. Now, I didn't know where he was, but this was the big area that he was working. And I just cleared all the channels. I jumped on, uh, called him. He didn't respond again. And I had mere seconds to make a decision. And all that went through my head is, if I'm wrong, I could get fired.
Hmm.
I might lose my job. But the flip side is, if I don't do it and he has been shot, he could die. And I just jumped on the radio. Everybody else in that room froze. Now, they didn't freeze for a really long time, but they just simply froze. I looked around. My boss had his mouth wide open. Everybody was just like, what do we do now? And I was, working it. And then all of a sudden I started yelling directions. I'm telling them what to do. I said, notify the hospital. I said, call the ambulance, notify the hospital, tell them to get an OR going. They've got a neurosurgeon on standby. I was shouting all of these different instructions. And afterwards, I kind of became a little bit of a hero, I guess, in the police department. And not that I wanted to be, I did not want that attention. It was a horrifying time. We didn't know. I mean, his funeral was planned that we did not expect him to live. Thankfully, he did. Um, but that was my first time that I realized that even experienced, trained people could freeze and not know what to do. Now, as soon as I nudged them, as soon as I started giving them direction, they were able to automatically, boom, they were
Right.
on it, doing a great job from there on in. And that's kind of what we have to do. Some people will be able to respond, and others we have to give them a nudge. Uh, People will freeze in an active shooter situation. Uh, it could be from fear. It could be from trauma, past trauma. Could be that their brain just can't. It's like if we ask a computer a question that it hasn't been programmed to do, it just kind of does nothing. That's sort of what happens with our brain. It just kind of keeps spinning. We can't connect what we should do. Um, and if we can nudge or say, come on, come with me, they can follow instructions. Most people can.
Just another thought occurred to me. There was a book, I think it was through Harvard Business Press, called The Knowing Doing Gap. I think in order to be able to respond to a tough situation, that they have to be very close together. The gap is very small, right? The bigger the gap is between the knowing and the doing, that's when you start to, you don't have a path, you don't have a skill, you don't have a way to approach it. It creates a problem. And even, again, all these different metaphors going through my mind where you're taking life saving as a lifeguard. And you know that if someone's drowning, the last thing you want to do, like the tendency, I don't want to help them and jump in and get close to them. Absolutely the worst thing to do, right? Because you get dragged down as well. And even though people have been trained to do that, to take just a moment to pause before and then respond rather than to react is so, so incredibly valuable. Or our parent with the kid, with the child that's having some kind of an emergency. Like the last thing you want to do is think about, I may lose my child, because it totally keeps you from responding in a way that's more likely to be helpful than harmful.
Exactly. That's a great example. And I have not read the Knowing Doing Gap, but I just wrote it down. I'm going to check that out.
Well, I just gave you the 2-second summary. You could save yourself a lot of time, a lot of money. So Carol, if someone is thinking, I really like this thought of being able to learn how to critically think and things like that, what are a couple of tips that you could give to someone if you want to just start to think about this before they have a chance to take one of your programs? What are some things to kind of keep top of mind? So, something happens. It doesn't have to be an active shooter, it could be anything, but just, one or two, you talked about mindset. One or two things to embed in one's new mindset that might be helpful.
Great question. I think the first thing is to identify any assumptions, biases, or trauma that you dealt with in the past that might come up. Because if we don't identify that, we can't stop the emotional reaction. And
Mhm.
critical thinking is really it's avoidance of any emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning isn't involved. And so you have to identify that. And then I think think about the consequences.
Mm, mm,
Think to the end result, sort of, so to speak, uh, kind of to work backwards, if you will. Like when I shared about the ambulance or the fire truck going through, it's like my thought is there's going to be another one because I've trained myself to think that way. Um, so whenever you come up with something, think about it with an open mind. And am I using critical thinking or am I just making a quick judgment of a situation? Um, and give yourself permission, I think,
mm.
to think critically. Um, and there is stuff that we buy into all the time. Um, I don't know. Do you have grandkids?
My daughter got married a week ago, so let's not push it.
Let's not push. Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, not yet. I'll just say not yet.
Right. Hopefully you will. So I was going to ask you if you knew that they're still teaching danger stranger in the school.
Well, I've heard the term. I didn't realize they're still teaching that, because that Yeah. Say more about that.
I so I think they are in some places and they aren't in others, but, the idea again, well-intended. We don't want our young kids walking away with a stranger who needs help finding their lost kitty cat or their lost puppy dog or whatever. So, well intended. Here's the problem because they didn't use critical thinking along with it. And this story is a few years old, but there was a young boy, about 5 years old, in a huge mall, huge, great big, huge mall, and got away from mom and dad. Very busy. Mom and dad did the right thing. They contacted security in the mall. They asked, they've got a picture of him on their cell phone. So they circulate this very quickly to all the security guards in the mall who are all wearing, white shirts and easily identified as security guards, right? And they spotted him on several different occasions. And all he did was repeat, danger, stranger, danger, stranger. And he ran from them. And he kept running and he kept running and he kept running. Do you know it was something like over 2 hours? Now take a 5-year-old
Oh,
who's in a highly traumatizing situation, lost mom and dad, has 0 idea where to go for help, um, has been taught danger stranger, thinks he can't go with any stranger, and there are hundreds, even thousands of strangers and shoppers in this environment. Where does the child go? And so that's where I have the problem with it. Danger stranger is good as far as it goes, but we need to be able to teach our children or our grandchildren. So if this happens, here's who you can trust. Here's where you can go. So you take your grandchild to a mall. You sit them down and the first thing you say, and this is critical thinking. If we were to get separated,
mm, mm,
if you were to lose sight of me, this is where I want you to go. This is who I want you to ask
mm,
for.
mm.
Think about it at the Calgary Stampede, at the CNE in Toronto. I mean, these are all massive places, right? You have a big event. We've got thousands, hundreds of thousands of people there. We don't need to traumatize. We need to teach people that critical thinking. So I believe we can teach critical thinking skills to children all along. We just need to learn it ourselves first and how to do it so that we're not terrifying them, but rather empowering them to make smart choices.
Well, and again, what I'm taking out of this is we have to teach people how to think, not what to think.
Yeah.
Because right, and it's sort of just the power of context.
Yes.
Very cool. Carol, this has been great. I haven't thought about these things before, especially about somehow our good intentions actually create problems because it prevents people from thinking critically. And it really is a life skill. And I should say, unfortunately, it's not taught in the schools so much anymore. And it would seem to be the thing that can apply to virtually everything you run into, right? So I will put your contact information in the program notes for those that are listening that can check out your website and things like that. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me today. And you look like you might have one final thought. You've got that look on your face. What would you like to leave people with?
Well, I was going to share my gratitude to you, and I think I've written down 3 or 4 different things as you've been talking, and I'm like, "Oh, that'd make a good article." Oh yeah, a good article too. So I have 3 or 4 things now that I can titles. I think that you've given me some great ideas. I think part of the problem is I'm so close to this work that I don't think of it the way other people maybe think about it. So I wanted to share with you just how valuable this has been for me as well. And I appreciate you and I appreciate you having me on here. And if I can help any of the listeners in any way, feel free to reach out.
Well, I shouldn't have said after that I do have one more thought, but I do. And one of the things that I'm concerned about the outcome, and the election will be over and done by the time this airs, early spring. But with some of the things that could happen, I think the importance for people to be able to think critically about what's going on and how to respond and long term are some really good messages. So, I may let this one slip out a little bit earlier than anticipated.
Well, It is a super important topic. I know I have clients in Washington, D.C., especially in the hospitality industry, and their plans are already in place. They were very poorly affected January 6th, where a lot of the people who were creating the havoc and the problems were staying at their hotels. So a lot of fear, a lot of potential damage, a lot of issues. And so it was kind of a learning that they are now preparing for, depending on things though.
Well, I so appreciate what you do. And, you think about serving a greater good. I think, that's one of the outcomes or outputs of the work that you do. So I wish you a long, healthy, prosperous life. Not so prosperous that you figure, oh, I don't have to work anymore, because we need to continue to do that work. So um, I've been here today with Carol Cambridge, the founder of the Stay Safe Project, and thank you so much. And those of you that are listening, thank you for listening. And boy, I can't wait to see what we talk about next. Subscribe now, because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.